Bitcoin has pushed above $81,300, and that move is doing more than setting a new price milestone. It is changing the entire tone of the crypto market. When Bitcoin breaks through major resistance at a moment of renewed capital inflows, investors begin looking beyond the largest asset in the sector. Attention quickly shifts toward where the next wave of momentum could emerge. That is exactly what is happening now. The latest market action is creating a familiar but important pattern. Bitcoin establishes strength, confidence returns, and capital starts rotating into projects that investors believe could outperform during the next phase of the cycle. Some are looking for large cap stability. Others are looking for emerging tokens that could benefit from exchange visibility, expanding communities, or fresh narratives entering the market. One of the names drawing unusual attention right now is Pepeto. The project is being discussed alongside the possibility of a future listing and increasingly ambitious upside expectations. At the same time, established assets are also re-entering focus as investors reassess positioning in a market that may be entering a new phase. The key question now is not simply why Bitcoin is rising. The more important question is where capital could move next, and which three cryptocurrencies are attracting the most attention right now. I'm Pamela, and you're watching XRP News. Bitcoin's move above $81,300 matters because it carries both technical and psychological weight. Major round number breakouts often become important market signals. Traders watch them closely because they can indicate a change in momentum, a shift in sentiment, or renewed conviction among participants who had previously stayed on the sidelines. The broader crypto market has spent extended periods navigating uncertainty. Inflation concerns, monetary policy expectations, risk appetite across global markets, and regulatory developments have all influenced investor behavior. In that environment, Bitcoin has often served as the market's anchor. When Bitcoin strengthens decisively, it frequently becomes a leading indicator for broader market participation. That does not automatically mean a straight-line rally follows. Crypto markets remain volatile. Pullbacks, sharp intraday moves, and rapid changes in sentiment remain part of the landscape. But historically, when Bitcoin breaks through closely watched levels after periods of consolidation, investors begin looking more closely at assets positioned to capture the next stage of market attention. That brings us to the central focus of today's story. As Bitcoin pushes higher, three different categories of opportunity are beginning to emerge. First, there are established assets with strong liquidity, deep market recognition, and institutional familiarity. Second, there are major ecosystem tokens positioned to benefit from renewed adoption and network activity. Third, there are smaller emerging projects that may attract speculative attention because of listings, narrative momentum, or community-driven growth. The three cryptocurrencies drawing particular attention right now sit across those categories. They are Bitcoin itself, XRP, and Pepeto. To understand why these names are being watched so closely, it is important to begin with Bitcoin. Bitcoin remains the benchmark against which the broader market is measured. It is the oldest major cryptocurrency, the most widely recognized, and the asset that many investors use as the first entry point into digital assets. Its market dominance means that when Bitcoin rallies, the rest of the market often reacts. There are several reasons why Bitcoin's current move is significant. First, price action matters because of market structure. Breakouts above widely observed levels can trigger fresh technical interest. Some traders interpret them as confirmation that momentum is strengthening. Others see them as evidence that previous resistance may now be turning into support. That dynamic can influence short-term positioning and medium-term expectations. Second, Bitcoin remains closely tied to macroeconomic expectations. When markets begin to anticipate changes in liquidity conditions, interest rate policy, or broader investor risk appetite, Bitcoin is often part of that conversation. While it remains volatile, it has increasingly become an asset observed not only by retail traders, but also by institutions, funds, and macro-oriented investors. Third, Bitcoin continues to hold narrative leadership. Even when other tokens outperform during certain phases of the cycle, Bitcoin typically sets the emotional and directional tone for the market. If confidence in Bitcoin improves, that often expands confidence elsewhere. But there is an important distinction here. For many investors, Bitcoin is not necessarily where they expect the highest percentage gains. Instead, it is often seen as the market's foundation. Once that foundation strengthens, attention often shifts to assets with potentially higher beta. That is where the next part of the story becomes especially important. The second cryptocurrency drawing attention right now is XRP. XRP remains one of the most recognized digital assets in the industry. Its market relevance has persisted through multiple cycles, periods of volatility, and major regulatory headlines. Unlike many smaller tokens that depend primarily on speculative momentum, XRP occupies a distinctive position because of its long-standing role in discussions around payments, liquidity, and cross-border settlement. For years, XRP has attracted attention from both supporters and critics. That debate has helped keep the asset consistently visible. Market participants often view XRP not only through the lens of price action, but also through broader questions about utility, legal clarity, adoption, and institutional relevance. That broader context matters now because renewed market strength often brings renewed attention to assets that already possess strong recognition. When capital rotates beyond Bitcoin, investors often begin with names they already know. XRP fits that description. It has liquidity, global visibility, a large community, and a long history of market participation. Another reason XRP is being watched closely is that it often becomes part of conversations about relative value during broader market recoveries. In periods where investors believe market sentiment is improving, established assets that have underperformed relative to recent expectations can suddenly become closely watched candidates for renewed momentum. That does not guarantee price outcomes. Markets do not move in simple patterns. But from a positioning perspective, XRP remains firmly on the radar. There is also a structural reason for that. Crypto markets are driven not only by fundamentals, but also by narrative cycles. Narratives matter because they shape attention, liquidity flows, and investor psychology. XRP already has a mature market narrative. It does not need to be introduced. When broader market momentum returns, that existing awareness can become an advantage. And there is another element worth noting. In market environments where speculative enthusiasm begins to expand, investors often divide capital between established names and smaller, higher-risk opportunities. That creates a bridge between large-cap familiarity and emerging narratives. That bridge leads directly to the third cryptocurrency attracting attention right now, Pepeto. Pepeto occupies a very different category. Unlike Bitcoin and XRP, Pepeto represents an emerging speculative narrative. Its current attention is being driven less by long-established market presence and more by community discussion, early-stage positioning, and the possibility of future exchange visibility. That distinction is critical. When smaller projects begin attracting attention during periods of broader market optimism, the drivers are often narrative intensity, community engagement, perceived scarcity, and listing expectations. In other words, investors are often reacting to future possibilities rather than current maturity. Pepeto is now appearing within that kind of conversation. The phrase 1,000 times has become part of the discussion around the project. It is important to be careful here. Such figures should not be interpreted as forecasts or confirmed expectations. They reflect speculative market language, not established outcomes. Crypto markets frequently produce exaggerated projections during periods of optimism, and responsible analysis requires separating narrative enthusiasm from verifiable facts. What can be said more concretely is that listing expectations often matter. Listings can be important catalysts for emerging tokens because they affect accessibility, visibility, and liquidity. When a project becomes easier for broader audiences to access, trading activity can increase. That does not guarantee long-term value, but it can materially affect short-term market behavior. For smaller projects, exchange access can represent a turning point in market exposure. That is one reason Pepeto is being watched. The other reason is market timing. Emerging tokens often receive the most attention when the broader market is already strengthening. Investors are generally more willing to explore higher risk opportunities when confidence has already been established by larger assets. In that sense, Bitcoin's breakout creates an environment in which smaller speculative narratives can receive more attention. This does not mean all emerging tokens will succeed. Most do not. Many experience sharp volatility, uneven liquidity, and rapid changes in sentiment. But when the market begins searching for new narratives, smaller projects often enter the conversation very quickly. That is exactly why Pepeto has become notable in the current environment. To understand the deeper significance of these three assets, it helps to look at how capital tends to move through crypto cycles. Market rotation often follows a recognizable sequence. It frequently begins with Bitcoin. That is where large flows often arrive first because Bitcoin offers liquidity, visibility, and relative market confidence. Once that initial strength is established, capital can begin moving toward major alternative assets. Those may include large-cap ecosystem tokens, payment-focused assets, or widely recognized network tokens. After that, if optimism expands further, smaller cap and narrative-driven projects may begin seeing increased speculative attention. This is not a rule. It does not happen uniformly in every cycle. External shocks, regulatory developments, and macroeconomic changes can disrupt these patterns. But as a broad framework, it helps explain why Bitcoin, XRP, and Pepeto are all appearing in current market conversations. Each represents a different layer of market participation. Bitcoin represents market leadership. XRP represents established alternative positioning. Pepeto represents emerging speculative narrative. That combination is why these names matter right now. There is another important point that often gets overlooked during rapid market moves. Price is only one part of the story. Volume, liquidity, participation breadth, and durability matter just as much. As a breakout can attract attention, but the market ultimately watches whether momentum is sustained. Are new participants entering? Are higher price levels being defended? Is activity broadening across major assets? Are new narratives generating durable engagement or only short-lived bursts of speculation? Those questions often determine whether a move becomes a larger trend or a temporary spike. For investors watching today's market, that distinction is essential. Short-term excitement can be powerful, but sustainability depends on broader participation. That brings us to a deeper question. Why does Bitcoin breaking above $81,300 matter beyond price alone? Because it affects psychology. Financial markets are driven partly by mathematics and partly by collective perception. When important thresholds are crossed, market participants reassess assumptions. Risk tolerance can change, capital allocation can change, narrative confidence can change. That psychological shift can be just as important as the numerical price level itself. In crypto, sentiment often moves faster than in traditional markets. A strong move by Bitcoin can quickly change how investors evaluate opportunity. Instead of focusing on downside protection, attention can begin shifting toward upside positioning. That is when conversations about rotation, emerging narratives, and relative opportunity begin intensifying. And that is what makes the current moment worth watching closely. Now let us take a closer look at the possible implications for the weeks ahead. If Bitcoin maintains strength above current levels, several developments could become increasingly relevant. One possibility is continued capital concentration in large-cap assets. In that scenario, investors may continue prioritizing liquidity and market leadership. Bitcoin and major established tokens could remain primary beneficiaries. A second possibility is broadening market participation. That would mean increasing activity across alternative assets, stronger volume outside Bitcoin, and greater narrative expansion across sectors such as payments, infrastructure, scaling, decentralized finance, and emerging meme-driven communities. A third possibility is volatility-driven consolidation. Markets do not move upward without interruption. Even strong breakouts often encounter profit-taking, retests, and periods of uncertainty. That would not necessarily invalidate the broader significance of the move, but it would remind participants that momentum rarely unfolds in a straight line. This is especially relevant when discussing smaller projects like Pepeto. Emerging tokens can experience very large moves in both directions. Early enthusiasm can generate rapid attention, but liquidity conditions can also change quickly. Investors watching such assets typically focus not only on narrative intensity, but also on execution, exchange accessibility, community durability, and sustained visibility. In other words, the difference between short-lived excitement and meaningful traction often becomes clear only over time. That is why context matters. For Bitcoin, the key issue is whether the breakout becomes structurally durable. For XRP, the key issue is whether renewed market confidence translates into sustained alternative asset interest. For Pepeto, the key issue is whether narrative momentum evolves into broader market accessibility and continued participation. Those are different questions, but they are all connected by the same market environment. There is also a broader structural development worth paying attention to. Crypto markets today operate in a more mature environment than in earlier cycles. Institutional awareness is greater, regulatory scrutiny is higher, information spreads faster. Market participants are more diverse. Retail traders, algorithmic funds, long-term holders, macro investors, and short-term momentum traders all interact within the same ecosystem. That means price action can now reflect a more complex mix of forces. A breakout may not have a single cause. It can reflect technical positioning, macro expectations, capital flows, narrative momentum, and cross-market sentiment all at once. That complexity is important because it reminds viewers not to oversimplify what is happening. Bitcoin moving above $81,300 is significant, but it should be understood within a broader market context rather than as an isolated headline. And that broader context is precisely why investors are asking which cryptocurrencies could matter next. When analysts and market participants discuss top cryptos to buy now, that phrase can mean different things depending on strategy. For some, it means seeking stability relative to the broader sector. For others, it means searching for asymmetric upside. For others still, it means balancing exposure across different market categories. That framework helps explain today's three names. Bitcoin offers scale, leadership, and structural relevance. XRP offers established visibility, alternative positioning, and continued market recognition. Pepeto offers emerging speculative narrative and potential event-driven attention. Different investors may prioritize different combinations of those characteristics, and that is why the current conversation is broader than a simple ranking. It is about market positioning during a changing environment. Another overlooked detail is timing. In financial markets, opportunity is often shaped not only by asset quality, but by when attention arrives. A project can have strong fundamentals but limited momentum if market attention is elsewhere. Conversely, a smaller project can attract rapid participation if timing, narrative, and market psychology align. That does not eliminate risk, but it explains why timing often becomes central to market behavior. Right now, timing is part of what makes this moment notable. Bitcoin's breakout has created a fresh narrative anchor. That anchor is pulling attention across the market. And once attention expands, investors begin asking increasingly targeted questions. Which assets have existing recognition? Which projects may benefit from renewed liquidity? Which narratives could gain traction if broader optimism continues? Those are the questions shaping current market discussion. Before we conclude, there is one final point that deserves emphasis. In fast-moving markets, headlines can move faster than facts. That is especially true in crypto. Listing speculation, projected returns, community enthusiasm, and social media momentum can all accelerate rapidly. But responsible market analysis depends on separating confirmed developments from expectations and expectations from speculation. Bitcoin trading above $81,300 is observable market action. XRP's continuing market relevance is established context. Pepeto's listing expectations and large upside projections remain part of developing market discussion rather than confirmed outcomes. That distinction matters. It helps investors remain informed without confusing momentum with certainty. And in volatile markets, that discipline can be extremely valuable. So where does that leave the market right now? Bitcoin's breakout has changed the immediate conversation. It has reinforced confidence, revived rotation discussions, and reopened the search for where the next wave of opportunity may emerge. Bitcoin remains the market's central signal. XRP remains one of the most closely watched established alternatives. Pepeto has entered the spotlight as an emerging speculative narrative linked to listing expectations and growing community attention. Whether this develops into a broader market expansion will depend on durability, participation, and how capital behaves in the days and weeks ahead. But one thing is clear, the market is paying attention again. And when attention returns to crypto, the most important moves often begin before the broader public fully realizes what is changing. That is why this moment matters. And that is why the next phase of market rotation could become one of the most important stories to watch from here. If you found this analysis valuable, stay with XRP News for continuing coverage of the market's most important developments, the emerging narratives shaping digital assets, and the deeper signals that often matter before the headlines catch up.